And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to look at another one of the sources of economic growth. And to do it, this time we are going to actually look at two production possibilities curves. The first production possibilities curve is going to be, and it wouldn't matter what country I pick, but I'm just going to say the United States. And the second production possibilities curve is going to be for Japan. Again, it wouldn't matter what country I would choose. And for the United States, we're going to say that we can produce two types of goods. So the first type of good that we're going to say would be capital goods, which I'm going to designate with a K on the vertical axis. And then on the horizontal axis, we're going to say the other type of good that the United States could produce would be consumer goods. And then we're going to say the same thing for Japan. They could spend their time producing capital goods, or they could spend their time producing consumer goods. Now, what we want to do is we want to say, well, what happens if the United States has a allocative efficiency point of, let's say, right here? So in other words, let's say the United States produces here on the production possibilities curve so that they are producing K1 capital and engaging and producing C1 consumer goods. So in other words, what this means is we are spending most of our resources producing consumer goods and relatively few resources producing capital goods. But we do produce some capital goods. And what is the advantage of producing a capital good? Well, my real world event, let's come down here for the United States and say my real world event for the United States is that we are giving up some current consumption. We are giving up some current consumption. We are giving up some current consumption right here. And instead of engaging in this much consumption, which we could do if that's all we used with our resources, we could produce this much consumer goods. But we're giving up a little bit of consumer goods so that we can have capital goods. That's called saving. We are giving up some consumer goods to get some capital goods. In other words, think about it like this. And instead of making all pizzas, I'm giving up some pizza today, some pizza that I could have made, I'm not going to make, and instead I'm going to spend that time producing pizza ovens. A pizza oven is capital. So my assumption would be a change in resources capital. That is to say, we're going to have more capital now, more tools for production than we had before. We call that investment. We used that terminology before. So if we have more capital, if we have more tools for production, we have more pizza ovens, that means we'll be able to make more pizza in the future. We'll be able to produce more goods and services in the future, and that's going to cause the production possibilities curve to shift to the right. And so the production possibilities curve in the future for the United States, because of this capital that we now have, is going to shift out to the right to production possibilities curve 2. And in the future, that's going to cause our output, our ability to produce goods and services, to go up. Again, this is another way to think about this. I use the pizza oven example. The same thing is with like a lawnmower. Instead of spending my time mowing somebody's lawn, I could build a lawnmower, and the lawnmower would be a piece of capital, and that would allow me to mow even more lawns in the future, shifting my production possibilities curve to the right, increasing output for the country. Now, let's do the exact same thing for Japan. But what we're going to say for Japan is that they produce right here. That's, say, their point of allocative efficiency. So that means that they are going to produce C1 units of consumer goods, and they're going to produce K1 units of capital goods. Now, the real-world event for Japan is going to be exactly the same as the real-world event for the United States. So I'm just doing Japan right here, and that is that they are giving up some current consumption. They are giving up some current consumption, just like the United States did. But the difference is that they're giving up more current consumption. Okay, they're giving up a lot of current consumption because they could produce here, which is all consumer goods and no capital goods. but they save a lot and give up a lot of consumer goods. And as a result of that, they can produce a lot of capital goods. So my real world event's going to be the same for Japan as it was for the United States. Change in resource capital. But if we have a lot more capital, a lot more tools for production, that means that the production possibilities curve is going to shift even farther to the right, to production possibilities curve 2. In other words, the shift is going to be much bigger because they have produced more capital goods. They have more tools for production, and that's going to lead to a bigger shift in the curve. So the shift is going to be to the right, and output's going to go up. But the big difference is that output is going to go up by more than it does for the United States. And that's because of the huge increase in the production of capital goods. So what this teaches us is that one of the sources of economic growth is giving up, and this one's hard, it's hard for people to deal with, but one of the sources of economic growth is giving up current consumption. The more consumption you give up today, the more economic growth you will have in the future. So let's just summarize what that looks like. If you let's say it this way, if you increase savings, that means decrease current consumption. That will allow your country to increase the production of capital goods, and that will mean increase production in the future. Increase production in the future. So that's one of our sources of economic growth: increasing saving, decreasing consumption, which increases capital, which increases production of goods and services in the future, shifting the production possibilities curve out to the right. This has been another podcast with Mr. Hagan, and we will see you on the next podcast.